The morning patrol in the park was calm until Officer James noticed a lone stroller under a tree. As he approached, he found a small black girl inside. She looked at him with wide, curious eyes, and there was no one else around. What happened? Where were her parents? Want to know what happened next? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more captivating stories. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the park, painting the dew-covered grass with a soft golden hue. Officer James adjusted his patrol hat, savoring the rare tranquility of the city's busiest park at this hour. The usual bustle of joggers, dog walkers, and families was absent, leaving behind a serene quiet broken only by the chirping of birds and the distant rustle of leaves in the breeze. James had walked this route countless times before. It was part of his routine, a path etched into his memory as much as the back streets of the city he'd sworn to protect. He had grown to appreciate these quiet moments, brief pockets of peace before the inevitable calls and chaos of the day. Today, he expected nothing different. As he rounded a gentle bend near a cluster of tall oaks, something unusual caught his eye. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, a vague silhouette tucked in the shadows beneath one of the trees. His steps slowed, his trained instincts kicking in. It was a stroller, standing eerily still. Alone. James frowned and glanced around. There was no sign of anyone nearby, no sound of a parent calling for a child or the chatter of a family enjoying the morning. The stroller seemed almost misplaced, like a forgotten relic left in haste. His pulse quickened slightly as he moved closer, scanning the area. Maybe someone just stepped away for a moment, he thought. Yet, the emptiness of the park gnawed at the back of his mind. Approaching the stroller, he noticed the small details, the worn fabric, a faint scuff mark on one of the wheels, the way it leaned slightly to one side as if abandoned in a rush. James hesitated for a moment, his breath catching. There was something about the stillness of the stroller that unsettled him. Swallowing the unease, he stepped closer, his hand resting instinctively on the radio clipped to his belt. James stopped a few feet away from the stroller, his boots crunching softly against the gravel path. The sight of it, so still, so out of place, set his heart pounding in a way he couldn't quite explain. He inhaled deeply, steadying himself, before leaning in to take a closer look. Inside the stroller sat a little girl. Her skin was dark and radiant, her small frame tucked neatly under a blanket that seemed far too thin for the crisp morning air. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old. Her tiny hands clutched the edges of the blanket, and her wide, curious eyes locked onto his as if she were waiting for him to say something, to do something. James froze for a moment, caught off guard by her gaze. It wasn't the kind of fearful or confused look he might have expected from a child in her situation. Instead, it was steady, almost unnervingly so, as though she were silently assessing him just as much as he was assessing her. The intensity of her eyes made him feel vulnerable, as if she could see right through the badge on his chest to the man underneath. He crouched down to her level, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Hey there," he said softly, his voice low and calm. "Are you okay? Where's your mom or dad?" The girl didn't answer. She just kept staring, her lips pressed into a quiet, solemn line. James glanced around again, scanning the park for any sign of someone, a frantic parent, a guardian calling out her name. But the paths and benches remained empty, the silence only broken by the occasional rustle of leaves above them. Troubling thoughts began to creep into his mind. Why was she alone? How long had she been sitting here, exposed to the morning chill? Was this an accident, or had someone left her here intentionally? He pushed the last thought away almost immediately. The very idea made his stomach churn, but the questions wouldn't stop swirling in his head. As he leaned in closer, he noticed the faint puff of her breath in the cold air. She didn't flinch or move away, she just watched him with those large, unblinking eyes. Her hair was neatly done in small, tight braids adorned with colorful beads that clinked softly as the wind stirred. She looked well cared for, which only deepened the mystery. This wasn't a child who had been neglected. James reached for the stroller's handle, intending to wheel it out of the shadow of the tree and into the sunlight. As he did, the girl's small hand shot out from beneath the blanket, grabbing the edge of his sleeve. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone so small. It wasn't a tug or a plea, just a simple gesture that somehow conveyed everything she wasn't saying. "It's okay," he assured her, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. "We're going to figure this out." The girl didn't let go. James stood frozen for a moment, his heart heavy with the weight of questions he didn't want to ask. The girl's silent stare stayed with him, cutting through the crisp morning air like a blade. As he gently pried her small fingers from his sleeve, his mind betrayed him with a thought so insidious it made him wince. Was she abandoned because of the color of her skin? The question hit him like a blow to the chest, uninvited and unwelcome. He felt a sharp pang of guilt for even thinking it, but the world he lived in had taught him to consider the worst, especially when it came to the most vulnerable. He hated how easily the idea surfaced, as if it had been waiting in the wings for a moment like this. "Don't be ridiculous," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head as though he could physically dislodge the thought. But it lingered, persistent, whispering doubts that clawed at the edges of his mind. People don't just abandon children. Not like this. Not unless, His chest tightened, and he straightened up, trying to focus on the present. The little girl was still watching him, her head tilted slightly now, as if sensing the storm brewing inside him. Her expression hadn't changed, calm, curious, but James couldn't help wondering what she was thinking. Did she know? Could she understand the unspoken weight of what might have brought her here? A cruel voice in the back of his mind mocked him, dripping with cynicism. She's not your problem, James. Just call it in, let someone else deal with this. People like you always want to save the day, but maybe this time, there's nothing to save, He clenched his jaw, furious at the voice, furious at himself for letting it take root. "Shut up," he hissed, under his breath, but firmly enough to feel some relief. That voice wasn't him, it was the world, the bitterness and prejudice he'd sworn to stand against when he first put on the badge. He wouldn't let it dictate his actions now. James crouched down again, softening his posture as he tried to meet the girl's gaze on her level. "Hey," he said gently, his voice breaking the uneasy silence. "I don't know what happened, but I promise you, we're going to figure it out." Her eyes seemed to search his, as though she were testing the weight of his words. He couldn't tell if she believed him, but the subtle slackening of her tiny shoulders made him feel she at least understood he meant no harm. Still, the question loomed large in his mind. If she had been abandoned, why, he needed to know, not just to do his job, but because it felt personal now. He refused to let his first, darkest thought define the narrative. There had to be more to the story, there always was. Straightening up, he pulled out his radio, the cool metal grounding him as he prepared to call it in. But before he could speak, he glanced down at the girl again. Her tiny fingers played with the hem of the blanket, her beads clinking faintly as she tilted her head toward the sun breaking through the trees. James felt something shift in his chest, a flicker of resolve hardening into a flame. Whatever brought her here, whatever choices, cruel or desperate, had left her alone under that tree, he wasn't going to let it end like this. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and he was determined to find it. James exhaled deeply, his hand steady as he adjusted the stroller's handle and leaned in for a closer inspection. The girl shifted slightly under the thin blanket, her small frame barely filling the seat. Something about the way the stroller was arranged felt deliberate, too neat, too purposeful for an accident. His eyes caught a faint shimmer of paper sticking out from beneath the blanket, tucked carefully between the fabric folds. Gently, he reached for it, mindful not to startle the girl. She watched him intently, her gaze never leaving his face, as if she knew the significance of what he was about to uncover. The paper was worn, its edges slightly frayed, but folded with precision. It was a letter, handwritten in a hurried yet legible script. James unfolded it slowly, his fingers brushing over the creases, and began to read. The first words stopped him cold. "To whoever finds my little girl," it began. James felt his breath hitch. His eyes darted to the girl, who now seemed impossibly small, impossibly fragile, under the weight of what the letter might reveal. He returned his focus to the page, the words pulling him deeper into the heartbreak it contained. Asterisk, her name is Amara. She is my everything. But I have run out of time. I fought as hard as I could, but I'm not going to win this fight. I know I won't see another sunrise, and I can't bear the thought of her being alone when I'm gone. Asterisk. James's throat tightened, the edges of the world blurring as the meaning of the words sank in. The mother's handwriting was shaky but determined, as though she poured the last of her strength into this final plea. Asterisk, if you are reading this, please, I beg you, take her in. Love her. Protect her. Raise her as your own. She is a kind soul, full of light and laughter. She deserves more than I could give her in this short time. I know this is too much to ask of a stranger, but I have no one else. Asterisk. His vision blurred with unshed tears as he read the last line. Asterisk, please, be the person I couldn't be. Give her a future. Give her a family. Asterisk. The words seemed to burn into his mind, their weight pressing down on him with a force he hadn't felt in years. He folded the letter carefully, his hands trembling as he placed it back in its spot. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't speak. The sheer depth of the mother's desperation and love left him stunned. James wiped at his face, quickly at first, then giving up as the tears came freely. He hadn't cried in years, not when he'd lost colleagues, not even at his father's funeral, but now, with this tiny girl watching him silently, the floodgates opened. The weight of the responsibility, the trust that a dying mother had placed in the hands of a stranger, was almost too much to bear. He crouched down again, meeting the girl's gaze, his voice cracking as he whispered, Amara, is that your name? The girl blinked, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. James felt his heart shatter and rebuild all at once. He reached out, not touching her but letting his hand hover just close enough to show her he was there. I promise, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I'll figure this out. I won't let you down. The girl didn't say a word, but something in her eyes softened, a flicker of trust igniting between them. James knew, in that moment, that he couldn't just hand her over to someone else. This wasn't just a case, and she wasn't just another name on a report. She was his responsibility now. James sat at his desk, the letter from the stroller still tucked in his jacket pocket. He couldn't bring himself to leave it behind, as though its weight reminded him of the responsibility he now carried. The precinct buzzed around him, phones ringing, officers moving in and out, but his focus was on one thing, uncovering the truth about Amara and her mother. He had started with the basics, a missing persons search, cross-referencing recent hospital records, and scouring reports for anything that might connect to the letter's haunting plea. It didn't take long for a name to surface, Naomi Fields, the hospital database confirmed she had been admitted weeks earlier, suffering from a severe, advanced illness. Her condition had been labeled terminal. James's stomach churned as he read the final note in her file, deceased. Time of death, 3:47 a.m. She had died only hours before he found Amara. James leaned back in his chair, the breath knocked out of him. The reality was as harsh as the morning light filtering through the blinds. Naomi Fields had spent her final hours preparing her daughter for a life without her. She had no one else to call, no one else to trust. That letter, written with trembling hands, had been her last desperate act of love. He tried to imagine her final moments. Alone in a sterile hospital room, knowing the end was near, knowing she wouldn't see another sunrise. He pictured her sitting upright despite the pain, forcing herself to write the letter while the machines beeped softly around her. She must have clung to every ounce of strength, every thread of hope, to place her daughter in that stroller and ensure she be found. James's chest tightened, the image of Naomi's struggle intertwining with the memory of Amara's wide, silent eyes. The weight of it was almost unbearable. He closed the file and rested his head in his hands, overwhelmed by the sheer tragedy of it all. Hey, James, a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Daniels, one of the officers from the Child Services Unit. You okay? You've been staring at that screen for hours. James looked up, his face weary but resolute. I found her mother, he said quietly. She died last night. Cancer, probably. It was fast. Too fast. Daniels hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. That's tough, man. At least the kid will be taken care of now. The system. The system? James cut him off, his tone sharper than he intended. You've seen what happens in the system, Daniels. Do you really think that's what Naomi wanted for her daughter? To become a case file, shuffled from one home to another until she's 18? Daniels raised his hands in defense. I'm just saying it's an option. You can't save everyone, James. James didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to his computer, his jaw tight as he reopened Naomi's file. He knew Daniels wasn't trying to be cruel, but the words stung nonetheless. Amara wasn't just anyone, she was a little girl who had lost everything in the span of a single night. Her mother's love had carried her as far as it could, and now it was James's turn to carry her the rest of the way. He clicked through Naomi's records, searching for anything that might give him more insight. There were no listed relatives, no emergency contacts, no signs of a support system. Naomi Fields had faced her illness and her impending death completely alone. But despite that, she had fought to the very end to give her daughter a chance. James leaned back in his chair again, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. Naomi's story wasn't just tragic, it was a testament to the lengths a mother would go to protect her child. She had sacrificed everything, endured the unimaginable, all for the faint hope that someone, anyone, would be kind enough to take Amara in. He glanced at the folded letter in his pocket, the words etched into his memory. Give her a future. Give her a family. James clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. He couldn't change Naomi's fate, but he could honor her final wish. Whatever it took, he would make sure Amara had the future her mother had dreamed of, the one she deserved. The precinct's break room was alive with chatter, the scent of burnt coffee mingling with the faint hum of the vending machine. James sat at the corner table, his shoulders hunched as he cradled a paper cup in his hands. He wasn't drinking it, the coffee had gone cold long ago. His mind was elsewhere, stuck in a loop of second-guessing and doubt. Across from him, Daniels leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Look, man, I get it. It's a sad situation, but this isn't on you. The system exists for a reason. James didn't respond immediately, his eyes fixed on the swirling patterns of condensation on his cup. The system, he finally said, his voice low. You mean the same system that bounces kids from one foster home to another until they age out? The same system that treats them like a number on a file? Daniel sighed, tapping his fingers against the table. It's not perfect, sure, but it's not like you can keep her. You don't know the first thing about raising a kid. And come on, you work crazy hours. How would you even manage? I don't know, James admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. It was the truth, and it terrified him. He didn't have the answers. He didn't even know the right questions to ask. But what he did know was that the idea of handing Amara over to a system that might not protect her felt like a betrayal of her mother, and of himself. Another voice joined the conversation, this time from Officer Grant, who leaned casually against the doorframe. Listen, James. You're a good guy, but you're not a hero. Sometimes you have to step back and let the professionals handle it. James's jaw tightened. He knew they meant well, but their words cut deep. Every comment felt like a nudge toward the easy way out, a reminder that he wasn't obligated to do anything more than the bare minimum. But as much as he wanted to walk away, he couldn't shake the image of Amara's tiny hand clutching his sleeve, or the quiet strength in her wide, unblinking eyes. You don't understand, James said finally, looking up at them. She's not just some case. Her mother. She gave everything she had to keep that girl safe. She wrote me a damn letter, begging me to give her a chance. How do I walk away from that? Grant shrugged. You do it because you have to. You're not her family. You're a cop. Your job was to find her and make sure she's safe. That's it. Safe, James repeated, the word dripping with sarcasm. You really think she'll be safe in an overcrowded orphanage, surrounded by strangers? She's 3 years old, Grant. She doesn't need a caseworker. She needs someone who gives a damn. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of James's words hanging heavy in the air. Daniels and Grant exchanged glances, their expressions softening, but their resolve unchanged. You're making this too personal, Daniels said gently. And that's dangerous. You can't let one case take over your life. It's not sustainable. James stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. You're right, he said, his voice firm. It's personal. Because it should be. We're talking about a little girl who's lost everything. If that doesn't feel personal, then what the hell are we even doing here? He left the break room without waiting for a response, his heart pounding as he walked back to his desk. The conversation had only solidified the battle raging within him. On one side, there was logic, the cold, detached reasoning that said this wasn't his responsibility. On the other, there was instinct, raw and unyielding, screaming at him to step up, to do what no one else would. Back at his desk, James looked at the folded letter once more, its edges worn from the number of times he had read it. The words seemed to echo in his mind, asterisk give her a future. Give her a family. Asterisk. He glanced toward the corner of the room where Amara sat quietly, her small figure almost swallowed by the oversized chair. She was coloring with crayon someone had given her, the bright hues standing out starkly against the gray of the precinct walls. She looked so small, so vulnerable, and yet there was a quiet resilience about her, as though she already understood more about loss and survival than most adults ever would. James exhaled, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He knew there was no easy answer, no perfect solution. But one thing was clear, he couldn't let the world fail her. Not again. The drive to the orphanage was a quiet one. Amara sat in the back seat of James's patrol car, her tiny form barely visible in the oversized car seat borrowed from the precinct storage room. She was silent, her gaze fixed out the window as the city blurred past. James glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his chest tightening with every passing mile. The orphanage loomed ahead, a gray brick building surrounded by a modest iron fence. It looked clean, orderly, functional, but cold. The kind of place that could provide the basics but never the warmth of a true home. James parked the car and sat there for a moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel as doubt gnawed at him. Okay, kid, he said finally, his voice low and steady. We're here. Amara didn't respond, but she turned her head to look at him, her dark eyes searching his face as if trying to read his thoughts. James stepped out of the car, the cool air biting at his skin, and opened the back door. He unbuckled her carefully, lifting her out of the seat. She didn't resist but clung to the blanket draped over her shoulders, her small fingers clutching it tightly. As they approached the orphanage gates, James felt his steps grow heavier. His boots scuffed against the gravel path, the sound echoing louder in his ears than it should have. Every step felt like a betrayal, as if he were walking away from something he couldn't yet name. A woman emerged from the building to greet them. She was dressed in a neatly pressed blouse and slacks, her expression kind but detached, a professional smile perfected over years of working with children who came and went. You must be Officer James, she said warmly, glancing down at Amara. And this must be the little one. James nodded, his throat dry. Her name's Amara. The woman crouched to Amara's level, her smile widening. Hi, Amara. We're going to take good care of you here, sweetheart. Amara didn't say a word. She simply tightened her grip on James's sleeve, her small hand holding on as if her life depended on it. The gesture sent a jolt through him, stopping him in his tracks. He looked down at her, her tiny fingers wrapped around his arm, her eyes filled with a silent plea. He crouched beside her, his voice soft. "It's okay, Amara. You'll be safe here." But even as he said the words, they felt hollow. Safe. Was that really enough? Was safety all she needed, or was there something more? He thought of the letter, of Naomi's desperate words. Asterisk, give her a family. Asterisk. Officer James, the woman prompted gently. Would you like to come inside for the paperwork? James opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. His mind raced, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He looked at Amara again, at the way she clung to him, her trust unspoken but palpable. And then, like a lightning strike, clarity hit him. He couldn't do it. He couldn't leave her here, not like this. Not when he was the one she had chosen to trust, the one she had reached out to. No, he said, his voice firm and steady. He stood, lifting Amara into his arms. She rested her head against his chest, her grip tightening as if she knew what he was about to say. The woman blinked, surprised. I'm sorry? I'm not leaving her here, James said, meeting her gaze. She's coming with me. The woman's expression shifted to one of confusion and concern. Officer James, I understand this is a difficult situation, but… No, he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. You don't understand. I made a promise. Her mother trusted me to make sure she has a family, and I'm not going to break that promise. The woman hesitated, clearly taken aback, but James didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked back to the car, Amara still in his arms. The cool wind whipped around them, but James barely noticed. All he could feel was the steady rhythm of Amara's breathing against his chest, the weight of her small body anchoring him to his decision. As he buckled her back into the car seat, Amara looked up at him with those same wide eyes. For the first time, a small smile tugged at the corners of her lips. It was faint, barely there, but it was enough. Enough to confirm that he had made the right choice. James climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine, glancing back at her in the mirror. We're going home, kid, he said softly. And for the first time in hours, the tension in his chest began to ease. James sat at his kitchen table late into the night, a stack of papers spread out before him. The adoption forms felt heavier than they should have, each page loaded with legal jargon and questions that seemed designed to challenge his resolve. The dim light of the kitchen lamp cast long shadows on the table, and the silence of the room was broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. Amara was asleep in the guest room down the hall, her small frame barely making a dent in the bed. He glanced at the clock. Nearly midnight. His pen hovered over the first page, and for a moment, doubt crept in. Was he really ready for this? He had no experience raising a child, no blueprint for how to be a father. His job demanded long hours, and his life was far from stable. But then he thought of Amara's wide, silent eyes, the way she had clung to him outside the orphanage, and the faint smile she'd given him on the ride home. He set the pen down and ran a hand through his hair. This wasn't about convenience or readiness. It was about doing what was right. Naomi's letter had entrusted him with a task that no one else had stepped up to take. Asterisk, give her a family. Asterisk, the words echoed in his mind, a promise he couldn't ignore. James leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as memories of the past few days washed over him. He thought of the prejudice that had colored his initial assumptions, the pressure from colleagues to walk away, and the system that so many children like Amara were forced to navigate alone. He knew the road ahead would be hard, not just for him, but for her. The world wasn't kind to girls like Amara, and he couldn't protect her from every cruelty it might throw her way. But he could give her a foundation, a place where she knew she was loved and valued. The responsibility felt enormous, but it didn't scare him. What scared him was the thought of failing her, of letting her down when she had no one else to turn to. He thought of her mother's courage, facing her final days with nothing but faith in the goodness of a stranger. Naomi had fought so hard to give her daughter a chance, and James knew he couldn't let that sacrifice go to waste. Taking a deep breath, he picked up the pen and began to write. His handwriting was firm and deliberate, each signature and initial a declaration of his commitment. With every form he completed, the weight in his chest began to lift, replaced by a quiet determination. He didn't have all the answers, but he had the will to learn. When he finally finished, he sat back and stared at the completed forms. They were just papers, but they represented a monumental shift in his life. He wasn't just Officer James anymore, he was about to become a father. The next morning, as the first light of dawn filtered through the windows, James made breakfast for the two of them. Amara shuffled into the kitchen, still groggy from sleep, her blanket trailing behind her like a cape. She climbed onto the chair he had pulled out for her and watched as he placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of her. "You're staying here, Amara," he said softly, sitting down across from her. "I'm going to take care of you." She looked up at him, her expression unreadable at first. But then, slowly, a small smile spread across her face. It was tentative, as if she wasn't quite sure how to trust the words, but it was there. For James, that smile was everything. It wasn't the end of the journey, far from it, but it was the first step towards something new, something better. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't face it alone. They would face it together. The first signs of judgment came almost immediately, subtle at first but impossible to ignore. James had barely finished filing the adoption paperwork when whispers started circulating around the precinct. A few colleagues gave him polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Others offered awkward pats on the back, their words laced with hesitation. "Big decision, huh?" Daniels remarked one day, leaning against James's desk. "You sure about this? I mean, it's not exactly conventional." James didn't look up. "What's that supposed to mean?" Daniels hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "I'm just saying, it's a lot to take on. A single guy, full-time cop, raising a little girl? And, well, people are gonna talk, you know?" James set his pen down and fixed Daniels with a level stare. "Let them talk." Daniels raised his hands in surrender. "All right, man. Your call. Just trying to look out for you." But James didn't need looking after. What he needed was for people to understand what he already knew, that this wasn't a decision he had made lightly. Amara deserved someone to fight for her, and he wasn't about to let a few raised eyebrows deter him. The neighbors were next. Mrs. Fletcher, who lived 2 doors down, had always been friendly enough, waving from her porch, occasionally offering baked goods. But the day she saw James walking hand in hand with Amara, her smile faltered. "New friend?" she asked, her tone overly casual. "My daughter," James said simply, watching as the woman's expression froze for a moment before she forced another smile. "Oh," she said, her voice tight. "Well, isn't that lovely?" Her reaction was mirrored by others in the neighborhood. People who had once greeted him warmly now seemed to keep their distance, their curiosity barely masked by thinly veiled judgment. James overheard snippets of conversations as he passed by, phrases like "not his place" and "poor girl." One evening, his sister Sarah called, her voice cautious. "James, I heard about the adoption," she began. I want to make sure you're thinking this through." "I've thought it through," James replied evenly. "But it's not just about you," she pressed. "Do you really think you're ready for this? Raising a child, especially one who, well, let's just say it's going to be complicated." James's grip on the phone tightened. "What exactly do you mean by that, Sarah?" "You know what I mean," she said, her tone defensive. "People are going to judge her. And you. Do you really want to put her through that?" "She's already been through more than most people could handle," James said, his voice sharp. "And I'm not going to let anyone, including you, make her feel like she's less than anyone else." The line went quiet for a moment. When Sarah spoke again, her voice was softer. "I just don't want you to get hurt." "This isn't about me," James said firmly. "It's about her." Despite the criticism and the skepticism, James found strength in his connection with Amara. Each day brought small moments of joy, her laughter when he let her pick out a ridiculous movie to watch, the way she clung to his hand during their first trip to the grocery store, the quiet moments when she curled up next to him with her favorite blanket. Every smile she gave him, every word she spoke, reminded him why he had made this choice. She was opening up, little by little, and James knew that creating a safe, loving home for her was worth every judgmental glance and whispered remark. One afternoon, as they walked through the park together, a man jogging past slowed down and gave James a pointed look. "She yours?" the man asked, his tone implying disbelief. James didn't hesitate. "Yeah," he said, looking down at Amara with a small smile. "She's mine." Amara looked up at him, her tiny hand gripping his tightly, and James felt an unshakable sense of resolve. The world might not understand, but he didn't need their approval. He had made a promise, to Naomi, to Amara, and to himself. And no amount of prejudice or doubt would make him break it. The sound of laughter echoed through the small house, the kind of laughter that made the walls feel warmer and the air lighter. Amara was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by a fortress of colorful blocks she had carefully built. James watched from the couch, a mug of coffee in his hand, marveling at how much had changed in just a few months. "Dad! Look!" Amara's voice was filled with excitement as she pointed to the towering structure she had constructed. James set his mug down and leaned forward. "Whoa, that's impressive. Is it a castle?" She nodded enthusiastically. "It's for us. You live in the tall tower, and I live in the small one next to it." James chuckled. "I think we can both fit in the big tower, don't you?" Amara considered this for a moment, then grinned. "Okay. But you have to protect me from the dragons." "Deal," James said, his heart swelling at the word "us." It was such a small thing, but it meant everything. They were a team now, a family. It hadn't been easy getting to this point. There were late nights filled with paperwork, moments of doubt when the world seemed determined to remind James of how unconventional his choice was. But every hurdle had been worth it. Amara was thriving, her once quiet demeanor replaced by a bright curiosity and an endless supply of questions about the world around her. James had grown, too. He had learned to braid hair, though it wasn't always perfect, mastered the art of bedtime stories, and discovered the strange joy of dance parties in the kitchen. He wasn't just a father in name, he was a father in every sense of the word. One sunny afternoon, they visited the park where their journey together had begun. Amara raced ahead to the swings, her laughter ringing out as James followed behind, carrying a small picnic basket. He couldn't help but think about how much had changed since that first day when he found her sitting in the stroller, lost and alone. Now, she was a force of nature, confident, joyful, and completely at home in the world. "Push me higher," she called from the swing, her braids flying behind her. James laughed, giving her a gentle push. "You're going to touch the clouds at this rate." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, they sat together on the grass, sharing peanut butter sandwiches. Amara leaned against James, her small hand resting on his arm. "I'm glad you found me," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. James looked down at her, his throat tightening. "I didn't just find you, Amara. We found each other." The world still wasn't perfect. There were moments when the stares and whispers of strangers reminded them both that some people clung to their prejudices. But those moments were overshadowed by the love they had built together, a bond that grew stronger with every passing day. Their story had become a testament to the power of humanity, to the idea that love, courage, and compassion could overcome even the deepest injustices. As they packed up their picnic and headed home, James felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. They weren't just surviving, they were living, building a life filled with joy, trust, and hope. What about this story touched you the most? Let us know in the comments, we'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss more inspiring stories like this one.